The river ran quiet that evening, its waters carrying secrets deeper than the land itself. A lone cowboy, weary from the trail, guided his horse alongside the banks, seeking nothing more than rest. But what he stumbled upon was no ordinary sight. Hidden away, shielded by willows and shadows, 3 Apache women bathed in silence, far from the eyes of settlers, far from the grasp of soldiers. What seemed like chance discovery quickly unraveled into a story of betrayal, oppression, and survival. This was more than a cowboy's tale. It was a glimpse into the brutal collision of 2 worlds, and the injustice one side could never escape. The cowboy's life had been shaped by endless horizons, dusty trails, endless cattle drives, and the rugged independence of the frontier. He was not a man of politics nor of tribes. His loyalties belonged to his horse, his rifle, and the silence of the wilderness. Yet history has a way of dragging even the most unwilling into its tides. The river was more than a stretch of water. It was a dividing line. On one side, settlers and soldiers claimed the land in the name of progress. On the other, the Apache fought to preserve their way of life, their families, and their dignity. The cowboy never set out to take sides, but the land itself seemed to demand it. That evening, when he came upon the women, he knew he had seen something dangerous, not because of them, but because of what would happen if others found out. For soldiers, these women would not be seen as human. They would be trophies, captives, leverage in a war waged under the banner of expansion. The cowboy dismounted, his instincts torn between walking away and understanding the quiet sorrow of their isolation. In their eyes was not fear of him, but fear of discovery. Fear of what men with uniforms and orders would do if the secret place was ever revealed. He stood frozen, aware that this single moment placed him at a crossroads where silence could either save lives or seal their doom. This was not simply a chance encounter by the river. It was the beginning of a choice, one that would force the cowboy to confront the truth about freedom, justice, and the price of looking away. The days that followed weighed heavily on the cowboy's mind. He had not spoken to the women. He had not disturbed their sanctuary, yet their image lingered with him, like a haunting reminder of the fragile line between safety and destruction. Word of unrest spread through the frontier town nearby. Soldiers rode in with the excuse of keeping peace, but everyone knew the truth: they were hunting. Apache raids had been exaggerated, twisted into justification for punishment. Homes were searched, camps were burned, and anyone tied to the Apache people became a target. The cowboy had seen this before. He had seen women and children dragged from their homes under the pretense of civilizing the savage. He had heard the cries of men chained for no crime other than being born on the wrong side of the river. And now, those memories collided with the living faces of the 3 women at the river's edge. He began to notice patrols circling closer. Soldiers spoke carelessly at the saloon, their voices sharp with cruelty. One night, he overheard them, boasting of rumors: 3 Apache women seen near the river hidden away. To them, it was only a matter of time before they flushed them out. The cowboy knew then that silence was no longer an option. If he did nothing, the women would be captured. Their fates would be sealed in chains and humiliation. Yet if he intervened, he risked not only his reputation but his life. In a land where loyalty was demanded to the flag, helping the enemy was branded as treason. The tension grew unbearable. He could not ride the trails without thinking of their faces, without feeling the burden of their unspoken plea. The river became more than water. It was a mirror reflecting the choice between complicity and courage. Finally, he returned to the river one last time. He saw them again, their eyes wary, their silence heavy with distrust. He raised his hand, slowly, not in authority, not in command, but in quiet solidarity. The cowboy, a man who once thought himself apart from politics and war, now stood at the edge of defiance. And as distant hoofbeats grew nearer, he realized the confrontation he had tried to avoid was now inevitable. The soldiers came at dusk. 4 riders, their silhouettes sharp against the fading sun, their rifles glinting with intent. They moved with confidence, knowing the town would not question their violence nor mourn their victims. The cowboy was already there, his horse tethered, his boots planted firmly in the soil by the river's edge. He had no plan except one, to stand between the women and the men who sought to claim them. The soldiers dismounted, sneers curling on their faces at the sight of him. To them, he was a fool. One man against the authority of the U.S. Army. They ordered him aside, their words dripping with arrogance, but he did not move. In that tense silence, the river roared louder than guns. The cowboy knew he could not match their firepower, nor could he undo the tide of conquest sweeping across the land. But in that moment, his resistance was more powerful than their rifles. A standoff erupted. The soldiers' threats filled the air, yet so did the unshaken resolve in the cowboy's stance. And for a fleeting instant, the women's fate shifted, not as captives but as witnesses to one man's refusal to let injustice go unanswered. The soldiers would remember that day, not for bloodshed, but for the rare defiance of a man who chose humanity over obedience. The women disappeared soon after, vanishing deeper into the lands their people still called home. Whether they survived the relentless hunts that followed, no one could say, but for the cowboy their memory became etched into his soul, proof that silence is complicity and complicity is betrayal. He rode on, the frontier stretching endlessly ahead. Yet the river was never just a river again. It had become a symbol of the choices men make when history places them at its edge. He had not changed the course of the war, nor undone the suffering inflicted upon an entire people, but he had made a stand, however small, against the current of cruelty. And in the end, that was enough to haunt the soldiers who once mocked him, and to inspire whispers of his quiet rebellion. The story of 3 Apache women and the cowboy who refused to turn away was not written in books or recorded in newspapers. It lived in the shadows, carried on the wind, a reminder that history is shaped not only by generals and politicians, but by ordinary people who dare to say no when the world demands silence. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, when the river of history runs past you, will you look away, or will you stand firm even when the cost is high?